far worse things waiting man than death.
You will be scared shitless.
And this is S. Michael with the Scared Shitless podcast. Joining me as always is Charlotte Spark. How are you this evening, Charlotte?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I can't complain. I'll just put it that way. So we are going to cover a movie that a friend of mine, Mr. Tommy Click, and I promised him I'd give him a shout out. Tommy has been following me around ever since I started the podcast, asking if I would please do this movie. And I kind of kept putting it off and kept putting it off. And then I met somebody who's into J horror just as much as I'm into 80s horror. So I thought, why not? Let's do it. So I finally sat down and watched it. And oh my gosh, what a ride. And I'm going to probably let you do most of the talking during this one because I have only seen the movie once, but I know for a fact that I'm going to be watching it way more than once.
Definitely.
Yeah, it really hits hard at that first viewing. And then you might want to take a period of time between the first and second viewings just to let everything settle in from that first initial shocking viewing. And this movie is shocking is a good word to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, did you know anything going into it at all?
Just, the AFI or what was it? A&E's top 100 horror movie moments. It was briefly mentioned on that, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting, And I thought, well, this is just a torture porn movie, so I wasn't, excited about seeing it, and I kept putting it off and putting it off. But after finally sitting down and watching it, it's way more than that. It's pretty much every kind of movie you can think of all squeezed into one. And then in the third act, it's like, no, we're a horror movie. We're definitely a horror movie.
Oh, 100%.
Do you remember the first time you saw it?
Yeah, I watched it because it was all like on the top 10 disturbing lists, and I was the director's done another film that I love, Ichi the Killer.
Yes.
And that's also a very disturbing film. So I was like, you know what? It's about time. I'm going to stick it on. And it was all that I didn't expect. It starts off as a beautiful, like, twisted love story. And then the climax just really takes you on a roller coaster. And I love it for that.
Yeah, so let's do what I usually do is start at the beginning. And at the beginning, we find ourselves in a place where we find ourselves in many, many horror movies, and that is somebody dealing with grief. I could go on all day about the movies that feature either a mother who's died or a father who's died or children who have died, but a couple that come to mind are Sinister. There was no mom in that one. The Babadook, there's no dad. But just there's movie after movie where grief is the central theme. And it is one of the central themes of this film, but not the only one. And one thing that I know personally about grief is that if you end up in the wrong space while you are grieving, you are capable of anything. And with Ariyama, we have a guy who is a stand-up guy. He's a hell of a dad. He's a hell of a husband. But the grief allows him to go to a place that he might not have gone without that grief. He goes to a very Weinsteinian place is the only way I could think of to describe it.
Yes, that's a good way to describe it. I think he's very confused about his misogynistic tendencies, and I think he's not that self-aware, and he's, especially with his work colleagues, I think he plays off that. And I think with grief, being alone, you're trying to make friends, and I think the people he surrounds themselves are quite harsh towards women. And as much as a good father he is, it slowly, he turns into this very sleazy character.
Yeah, scummy was the word I had written down.
Mine was sleazy.
Versus him being an otherwise stand-up guy, and so it's almost, doubly tragic to see him go to that place. So he has these colleagues that are in the film industry, and he has a partner who says, "Hey, why don't we do a movie and don't worry about whether or not we actually get the movie funded or if we even get it made. The whole point of this movie is going to be to find you somebody who you're attracted to, who you can, marry and not be
Yeah.
lonely anymore," which, like you said, surrounding yourself with the wrong kind of people while you're grieving, bad move.
Yeah. And I
You
mean,
know,
the
wow.
whole scene is there's so much to unravel in just that auditioning scene, well, the film title Audition. But with the scene alone, it's just like what I love about this film is whether you take it or not, it's quite a feminist film. And it's horrible to see these men just use these poor women and like they're so hopeful for this audition and you really feel for them putting their all in and they're just kind of objects of lust
Absolutely.
and
And
he
she comes right out and says while she's doing the torture, she's
mm.
like, "You treat women like this and that." And it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
in a way, maybe not to this degree, but in a way, he definitely had it coming. So,
yeah, but it's just like even though he picked her from the beginning he still has all these women and they're asking him such inappropriate questions and it's really like I think that scene's quite hard to watch personally as a woman because like you just really feel for them.
yeah, and it almost plays out like a comedy in parts, like
Yeah,
just the absurdity of it all, where you just have woman after woman after woman in the seats in the room
yeah,
surrounded by all this power, and that's the power dynamic. I think
yeah,
it was a good visual of that power dynamic. Is here you have this desk with these powerful men, but you have in the middle of the room this one chair where woman after woman after woman is just looked at as a commodity.
yeah,
So it's definitely a powerful feminist message. And that's one of the things that I love about this movie is that, you're going to
yeah.
hear a lot of people, probably from my age group, complain about how much of a slow burn it is. But
Oh yeah.
you don't see the first kind of scary stuff until about 40 minutes into the movie. But there's a
Yeah,
reason for that. They want you to take this roller coaster of what am I watching? What kind of movie is this? So it starts off with this sort of melodrama where, his wife dies and he has to deal with the grief and the tragedy of that. And then it goes to the audition part where it's almost a comedy, but then it has these feminist overtones, So
mm,
it's comedy plus social commentary.
yeah,
And then you've got the next part, which is the mystery of it all. Like, who is this girl? Where did she come from?
yeah.
How did she get a hold of us without an actual agent? What's going on here?
And
And
she's so cold. And I think the actress, I love her. She's in a few films that I love. And she plays this character so ghostly and cold. And she just walks in and she's so creepy, but he's like infatuated with her, which is so
yeah,
strange. Because
it
as a guy,
is.
it's like if I was him, I'd be like, that's off-putting. She's just staring. No, thank
Right.
you. But
It's
he's
almost
like
like,
really
what
into
was
her.
he looking for exactly? If you look
Mm,
at the psychological implications, was he looking for a ghost? Was he looking for his wife?
yeah.
Was he looking for somebody who's as broken as he is, having
Yeah.
lost his wife? It's hard to say, but at the end of the day, that's not how you're supposed to find a wife.
No, and I think as well with her, she's so obedient from the beginning, and it's like that's what is stereotypical, like what men would look for in a wife. And she sits and she's so prim and proper, and like even though she's creepy, she's obedient, and anything they say she'll do. And I think that's why he's so drawn to her, and that's also like a commentary on itself about what men
Yeah,
look for
and
in women.
I'm not Japanese, so I can't really comment on Japanese culture per se, but one
Mm.
thing I did notice is that throughout the movie, he is expected to have a wife or a girlfriend.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
expected of him as a man of his stature. And even his secretary, I saw some
Oh,
undertones of jealousy there. Like
yeah.
she was wanting to maybe be considered to be his wife or girlfriend. And when she tells him, "Hey, I'm getting married," he's like, "Okay,
He
good
doesn't
for
care
you." Yeah.
because they hooked up and it's not actually like in your face, like they hooked up,
Yeah.
but there it is there, especially when he's hallucinating, she's there. And it's like kind of told that they hooked up and he kind of went, tossed her aside,
Yeah.
done with you. But she still was very much like, I want to be with you, want to take this further. And then he
Right.
was, and that's like the sexism undertones that he kind of just
Yeah.
goes, another one.
And that's another layer to the feminist
Mm,
commentary. But yeah, I noticed she said something like, a man is expected to be with a woman, something along those
yeah.
lines. And yeah, I mean, so he rose to the expectations in a rather sleazy way.
Yeah.
And then he starts to get his comeuppance with some actual horror. So 40, 45 minutes into the film, we start unraveling this mystery of who Asami is, where does she come
Hmm.
from? You know, we have this dinner date, which it could go either way. You know, she
Yeah.
seems like she's very innocent and sweet, but then she also unleashes a little bit of baggage. You know, like, oh,
Yeah. I mean, a ton of baggage.
I've been through some stuff, and it's like, well, which way is this going to go? And it goes just the way that you would expect a horror movie to go.
It's crazy. I mean, when I first watched it and like the mental health that this poor woman suffers with and the flashbacks, but you never know if she's actually like telling the truth. It kind of comes across as it could be either. Like she's such a mystery, and that's what I love about her that you don't know if any of it's actually true.
Yeah, somebody that crazy, crazy enough
Mm,
to do the things that she ends up doing is capable of anything, and that includes
yeah.
just fabricating a whole thing just to get her rocks off. Um, but she's the other monster of the film. You know, there's two monsters. There's the
Mhm.
patriarchy, and then there's her.
Yeah.
And how monstrous we find out she is not completely revealed until the final act, but we get bits and pieces, no pun intended,
Yeah.
um, as he goes looking for just who she is and where she's from. And
Mm,
um, he meets the piano player.
yeah.
And what a creep. Oh my gosh. I don't know what rock this guy crawled out from under, but I was instantly like, this, oh my God, this is like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Igor and all of them all rolled into one. And he's
Yeah.
missing feet. And that takes on some implications later. But what we find out later is that if you piss her off, if you end up on her shit list and you are missing feet, it's because you've done something to piss her off. And apparently, this guy,
Yeah.
and we see through flashbacks, and so that's what makes this, I think, a unique film is the non-linear aspect of it. You know,
Hmm.
we see flashbacks of him abusing her and just how sick and twisted he is, and we don't feel a bit bad for him and his wooden feet, as creepy as they are, because he definitely had it coming.
Oh yeah.
You know, but the first scary scene, of course, that we see is when we find out what happened to the manager. He's in a bag.
Yeah.
And now she's
That
her own
guy.
manager. She's her own manager now. um, and seeing that bag move for the first time was
Oh,
just such a great jump scare. It was like Carrie level jump scare, you know, where the hand comes up out of the rocks at the end of Carrie. It's like,
yeah.
because you've been waiting for the whole film, a good 40 some odd minutes, like I said, for something to happen, and it does, and it's very effective because you keep seeing images of the bag, you know, all throughout the film. So yeah,
No,
the other aspect of it that was kind of tripping me out was the dream sequence at the end. You don't know what's real because he's
yeah.
been drugged. And so I found that, let's go ahead and do the scared shit list.
You will be scared shitless.
And for anybody who's joining us, the scared shit list is a time during the show where we talk about the things that actually scared us that we thought were scary.
Mhm.
And I've got to say, the dream sequence where he's lying in bed next to her was the scariest moment for me, because it's like, is this real?
Yeah.
Has he gone through the things that we saw him go through, which included having a severed foot and pins stuck in his stomach and under his eyes.
Yeah.
Or is this real and none of that happened? Or did that happen and this is like what could have happened? It's just so surreal and weird and scary that I was like tripping balls for a minute there. Yeah.
Is, and I love it what the scene where she's laid at the bottom of the stairs and she's just talking to him and
Yeah.
it's just like
You see that
bizarre,
her neck is broken, but
but she's
she's
talking.
talking to him. Yeah, and she said, "Oh, I've never been so happy, or I've never
Yeah,
smiled so much." Whatever. It's like, oh my God.
it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, only J horror, I think, takes it to that next level of just surreality.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, for me, I couldn't pinpoint the scariest part for me, but if I was gonna pick one tiny thing, it has to be the dog bowl.
Oh God.
As someone,
Bleh.
I have a phobia of it, and to only find out that it was all real, it was her own sick because she was a method actress and she demanded that it had to be her own. Every time I watch it now, it really makes my skin crawl.
Yeah, I heard that in one of the commentaries too, and they didn't give the details, but now that I've heard the details, I'm like, oh, well, no wonder her IMDb is so short.
I know. She's been in some, she's one of those actresses that she's not been in a lot, but what she's been in is just all wild.
Wow. Well, that's pretty damn scary. The
Yeah,
whole missing a
yeah,
tongue, and that was the idea of it was just disturbing to me. Like he has no tongue, so he can't lap it up like a dog. So he's got to
yeah.
actually inhale it. Like
It's horrible.
ugh, it reminded me of the Fly. Jeff Goldblum
Ugh.
sucking up the donuts in the Fly.
This, yeah, stuff like that makes me like scares me more than blood or anything. It's stuff
Yeah,
like that. Like the fly is another one that makes me go, ugh, because it's all the liquids and fluids that,
yeah.
ugh,
Ugh.
not for me.
Playfully called vomit drop. Yeah.
It's
The
not for me.
uh the other physical thing that bothered me that I thought was scary was the pins, not just the pins being in his
Mm,
belly, but then once she sticks them all in him, you're like, well, what's she gonna do with them? Is she gonna leave them there? Is she gonna take them out? And then she's like, no, I'm just gonna crawl up on top of him nonchalantly and push them down in there. Who cares where they land? So he's
yeah,
probably dead meat. That's not something that I think the human body can tolerate too much of.
no, it's so
Um,
creative.
yeah, so he's most likely doomed, but it's interesting that his son does arrive to save the day.
Hmm.
You do get that not quite Hollywood ending of, the good guys, quote unquote, winning. But if you think about it, have they really won? Like,
And are
he's
they the
gonna,
good guys? Are they?
yeah, if his dad does survive, he's gonna have to explain everything to his son. And yeah,
Yeah,
not the
it's
best
a
example,
yeah, it's a very awkward conversation to be having.
no doubt. Any other thoughts on this movie?
I
Audition from 1999.
I it's one of those I could talk about it for hours and go into how I feel because it's one of those films that I think if you look past all the disturbingness and all the creepiness, it's such a beautiful story about the lasting effect of abuse and what it has on people and to it's people aren't what they seem and you never really know anyone. And I think the director just tells the story in such a beautiful way, but then on the flip side, a lot of people really hate this film and think it's very misogynistic and it's just horrible and they don't like it. And I personally love it. And I think it's one of those stories that needs to be told, but maybe with less of the vomit and all
All
that
right.
and then the feet.
Well, and to think that this came out in 1999, so this was
Yeah.
pre-Saw. This came out before Saw. It came out before the Hostel movies. This probably was too much for a lot of
Oh,
people at the time. It's still too much for a
yeah.
lot of people, although, compared to some of those stuff that came out later, it's actually tame, but that's just how Hollywood works. It's a gradual thing. We started off
Yeah.
with the Faces of Death and the Mondo stuff in the 70s, and then now we've got the Saw movies and Terrifier, and just nothing
Yeah.
is sacred anymore.
See,
Um,
it's all been done before now.
yeah, it's all been done. We've seen it all. We've been desensitized to it. But I gotta tell you, the way that this was represented, even though I've been desensitized, it was highly effective, you know.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the little tongue, you know,
Yeah.
what the hell? Four missing pieces.
It's such a good film, and I think this slow burn makes it even more creepier because it's not right in your face, it's just slowly unraveled. Then you're sat there for the last half an hour or so, like, what just happened?
Oh, and
What did I watch?
yeah, what masterful direction. I mean, like I said, he starts
Yeah,
off with melodrama, comedy, mystery slash romance, feminism, and then just in your face horror.
yeah,
You know, there's not a lot of movies that take that route. Not in the way that this one did. So,
no,
if we're gonna rate this movie in terms of J horror, I've only seen a handful of Japanese horror films. I would put this right at the top in terms of direction, in terms of character development, and gore.
yeah,
Um, as far as horror movies go, I'd give it a solid 8. You know, compared to other movies that I love, like The Ring and Dawn of
yeah,
the Dead, and you know, Dracula. I mean, yeah, it's right up there because of what it does with its
mm,
subject matter, you know.
yeah. No, I agree on that rate, the 8. I would put it as an 8, but for J horror for me, it's probably about mid-level because there are better and
Oh
there's my
wow.
I personally have different favorites, but it's such a beautiful story and like the representation, like you said, I love that so much. But in terms of scare factors and grossness, I've seen different J horrors that do more of that for me. And I would recommend Ichi the Killer by the same director. That is all out gross gore, disturbing from the moment it starts. I mean, that's a really good recommendation to follow Audition if you're not a fan of the slow burn. But for me, I prefer Ichi the Killer. So I'd put it in the
Awesome.
middle.
Thank you for the recommendation. And yes, you heard it right here, folks. Charlotte Spark recommends Ichi the Killer.
I mean,
Let's
some
broaden our
people might
horizons, you know.
some people might not forgive me for that because it is a wild film.
Well, I think we're coming up on the end, yeah.
Mhm.
But I really appreciate you joining me for these.